The Knights Templar, an order whose very name evokes whispers of ancient secrets and hallowed quests, emerged from the tumultuous aftermath of the First Crusade in the sacred, dust-laden lands of the Holy Land around the year 1119. Imagine a world still reeling from the shockwaves of conquest, where the scent of frankincense mingled with the acrid tang of conflict, and the sun beat down relentlessly on ancient stones that had witnessed millennia of human drama. It was a time when the concept of pilgrimage, a journey to sacred sites, was fraught with peril, especially for those venturing to Jerusalem, newly captured by Christian forces. The roads were not paved with good intentions, but with the very real dangers of banditry and sporadic skirmishes, making the spiritual quest a life-threatening endeavor. Before the Templars, there was the First Crusade itself, a sprawling, chaotic, and deeply fervent movement that swept across Europe from 1095 to 1099. Driven by a complex tapestry of religious zeal, political ambition, and economic opportunity, thousands of men, women, and even children embarked on an arduous journey eastward. Their ultimate goal was the liberation of Jerusalem, the city deemed holy by three great Abrahamic faiths, from Seljuk Turkish rule. The capture of Jerusalem in 1099 was a brutal affair, etched in history by its immense human cost. Yet it established the Latin Kingdom of Jerusalem, a fragile Christian outpost in a predominantly Muslim world. This new kingdom, however, was like a small, flickering flame in a vast, dark wilderness, constantly threatened by external forces and internal strife. It was into this precarious landscape that a group of 9 French knights, led by a nobleman named Hugues de Payens, stepped forward. Their initial proposal, presented to King Baldwin II of Jerusalem and the Patriarch Warmond, was remarkably humble, yet profoundly practical. They would dedicate themselves to protecting pilgrims on the dangerous routes between the coastal cities and Jerusalem. There were no grand pronouncements of vast wealth or military might at this nascent stage, simply a solemn vow to safeguard the vulnerable. This small band of men, bound by their shared faith and a burgeoning sense of chivalry, were initially so poor that they relied on charitable donations for their sustenance. Legend has it that they had only one horse between 2 knights, a poignant image often depicted in early Templar seals, symbolizing their poverty and brotherhood. This detail, though perhaps romanticized over time, underscores their initial lack of resources, making their eventual rise all the more remarkable. For their headquarters, King Baldwin II granted them a wing of the royal palace, which stood on the Temple Mount, the very site of the ancient Jewish temple, and later, the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque. It was this location, steeped in millennia of sacred history, that gave the order its evocative name, the Poor Fellow Soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon, or more simply, the Knights of the Temple, or Templars. Living in such proximity to these hallowed grounds, one can only imagine the weight of history that pressed upon them daily. Perhaps these ancient walls, silent witnesses to prophets and kings, whispered stories to the stars, influencing the very spirit of the men who sought refuge within them. For nearly a decade, this small group of knights operated largely in obscurity, their numbers remaining few, their impact limited. Though their intentions were undoubtedly noble, they were essentially a monastic order of warrior monks, a new and somewhat radical concept for the time. Monks traditionally prayed and studied, while knights fought. The idea of combining spiritual devotion with military service was a novel one, and it required formal recognition and a structured rule to gain widespread acceptance. This would come at the Council of Troyes. The turning point for the Templars arrived. In 1129, at the Council of Troyes, a pivotal ecclesiastical gathering in France. It was here that they received the official endorsement of the Church, largely due to the impassioned advocacy of Bernard of Clairvaux, one of the most influential churchmen of the 12th century. Bernard, a Cistercian abbot renowned for his asceticism and persuasive eloquence, saw in the Templars not just a band of protectors, but a new model of Christian knighthood, one that combined the warrior's prowess with the monk's piety. He penned a treatise, De Laude Novae Militiae, in praise of the new knighthood, which eloquently articulated the spiritual justification for this hybrid order. He argued that these new knights were not merely shedding blood, but shedding evil, fighting for God rather than for worldly gain. This powerful endorsement from such a respected figure was instrumental in elevating the Templars from a small, struggling group to an internationally recognized and rapidly growing order. With the Church's official blessing, the Templars were granted a specific rule, a set of guidelines for their daily lives and conduct, largely based on the Cistercian rule. This rule detailed everything from their vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience to their dress code, a white mantle adorned with a red cross, symbolizing martyrdom and purity. This distinctive uniform quickly became iconic, instantly recognizable across Christendom. The rule also outlined their military duties, their prayer schedule, and even their dietary restrictions. It transformed them from an informal brotherhood into a disciplined, structured, and formidable organization. One of the lesser-known aspects of their early days, often overshadowed by their later military exploits, was their innovative approach to fundraising and logistics. As they grew, they realized the need for a robust support network in Europe to sustain their operations in the Holy Land. They began establishing preceptories or commanderies across Western Europe. These were not just recruitment centers, but also agricultural and financial hubs. Land was donated to them, which they managed efficiently, often using advanced farming techniques. They received tithes and donations from pious nobles and commoners alike. This network of preceptories allowed them to generate income, recruit new members, and transport men, money, and supplies to the East. This sophisticated logistical system was, in many ways, as crucial to their success as their prowess on the battlefield. Historians still debate the exact nature of the Templars' financial practices, and whether their immense wealth was primarily accumulated through legitimate means, or if some of their later activities bordered on usury, which was forbidden by the Church. While their early poverty is well documented, their rapid accumulation of assets and their role as proto-bankers in Europe certainly raised eyebrows and fueled later accusations. They developed a system of letters of credit, allowing pilgrims and crusaders to deposit money in one Templar house in Europe and withdraw it from another in the Holy Land, thereby avoiding the dangers of carrying large sums of cash. This system was revolutionary for its time and laid some of the groundwork for modern banking practices. From these humble and perilous beginnings, the Knights Templar rapidly transformed. They were no longer just protectors of pilgrims, but became the elite shock troops of the Crusader states, renowned for their courage, discipline, and unwavering devotion. Their white mantles and red crosses became a symbol of hope for Christians in the East and a terrifying sight for their enemies. They participated in virtually every major campaign in the Holy Land for the next 2 centuries, from the Siege of Ascalon to the Battle of Harim, often forming the vanguard or rearguard, the most dangerous positions in medieval warfare. Their commitment to fighting to the last man, rather than retreating, became legendary, though it also led to heavy losses. Their story, however, was only just beginning, unfolding against the backdrop of shifting alliances, relentless warfare, and the ever-present spiritual fervor that defined the age of the Crusades. If you're enjoying this, liking and subscribing truly helps and is much appreciated. The whispers of the Holy Land, carried across the Mediterranean by returning pilgrims and eager merchants, found fertile ground in the ears of the powerful. Hugh de Paynes, a knight whose very name seemed to echo the struggles of his age, understood that true enduring strength lay not just in the sword, but in the solemn blessing of the Church. He embarked on a journey that would forever alter the destiny of his nascent brotherhood, a pilgrimage not of faith to a distant shrine, but of purpose to the heart of Christian power in Europe. In the year 1127, Hugh de Paynes and a small retinue of his knights set sail from the Latin East, leaving behind the sun-baked stones of Jerusalem for the verdant landscapes of Western Europe. Their mission was clear: to secure official papal recognition and to garner support, both spiritual and material, for their unique calling. They carried with them letters of endorsement from Baldwin II, the King of Jerusalem, and Warmond, the Patriarch of Jerusalem, powerful testaments to their valor and the desperate need for their protection. These letters spoke not just of brave deeds, but of the very vulnerability of pilgrims and the tenuous grip the Crusader states held on the Holy Land. Their arrival in Europe was met with a mixture of curiosity and reverence. News of their extraordinary vow, to live as monks yet fight as knights, had preceded them, painting a romantic and inspiring picture. They were seen not merely as soldiers, but as living embodiments of Christian ideals, a bridge between the spiritual and the temporal. Their journey took them through France, where they met with influential nobles and churchmen, sharing tales of the Holy Land's perils and the sacred duty they had undertaken. The true turning point, however, came in the winter of 1128, with the convening of the Council of Troyes. This was no ordinary gathering. It was a council orchestrated by the powerful Cistercian abbot, Bernard of Clairvaux, a man whose influence on the spiritual and political landscape of 12th century Europe was immense. Bernard, a figure of profound intellect and ascetic piety, had initially been skeptical of the Templars. How could men truly serve God by shedding blood? Yet, after meeting Hugh de Paynes and hearing his impassioned plea, and perhaps swayed by the urgent appeals from the Holy Land, Bernard became their most ardent champion. He saw in them not just warriors, but a new model of Christian knighthood, disciplined and devoted, a potential antidote to the often brutal and self-serving feudal aristocracy. The Council of Troyes, held in the Cathedral of Saints Peter and Paul, was a pivotal moment. Before an assembly of archbishops, bishops, and abbots, Hugh de Paynes presented the Templars' case. He spoke of their humble beginnings, their vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, and their unwavering commitment to protecting pilgrims on the dangerous roads to Jerusalem. The council, under Bernard's persuasive guidance, listened intently. On January 13, 1129, a new rule, specifically tailored for the Order of the Temple, was officially sanctioned. This rule, largely drafted by Bernard himself, laid out the framework for their monastic military life, drawing heavily from the Cistercian rule, yet adapting it for men who would wield swords as well as crosses. It mandated a strict daily regimen of prayer, communal meals, and austere living, but also provided for the practicalities of military life, from the care of horses to the maintenance of arms. This papal recognition was a watershed moment. It transformed the Knights of the Temple from a small, informal band of pious warriors into an officially sanctioned religious order. directly under the authority of the Pope. This direct allegiance bypassed the traditional feudal hierarchies, granting them an unprecedented degree of independence and power. They were no longer merely knights. They were God's knights, their actions blessed by the highest spiritu, all authority. With the blessing of the Church, the Templars' growth was nothing short of meteoric. Hugh de Paynes and his knights traveled extensively throughout Europe, their presence inspiring awe and generating immense goodwill. They were granted lands, donations of money, and recruits from all social strata. Noble families, eager to secure spiritual merit or to see their younger sons embark on a noble, holy path, sent their children to join the order. Commoners, too, were drawn by the promise of salvation and the prestige associated with serving such a revered institution. One of the most powerful symbols of their newfound status was the adoption of their distinctive habit, a white mantle, symbolizing purity and chastity, adorned with a red cross, symbolizing martyrdom and sacrifice. This simple yet striking uniform made them instantly recognizable and instilled both fear in their enemies and respect in their allies. The Red Cross, worn over the heart, served as a constant reminder of their ultimate purpose, to fight for Christ. The Templars established preceptories and commanderies across Europe, from England and France to Spain, Portugal, and Italy. These were not just recruitment centers. They were sophisticated administrative and economic hubs. Each preceptory managed the order's vast landholdings, collected rents, and oversaw agricultural production. They became centers of innovation in land management and finance, often employing advanced agricultural techniques and developing sophisticated accounting practices. The produce and revenue generated from these European estates were not for individual gain. They were meticulously channeled back to support the order's operations in the Holy Land. This vast network of resources was crucial for sustaining their military presence thousands of miles away. Their rapid expansion was also fueled by a series of papal bulls that further cemented their privileges and independence. The most significant of these was Omne Datum Optimum, issued by Pope Innocent II in 1139. This bull granted the Templars extraordinary exemptions. They were exempt from tithes, could build their own chapels, and bury their dead in consecrated ground, and were answerable only to the Pope himself. This meant they did not have to pay taxes to local bishops or kings, and their internal affairs were beyond the reach of secular or even most ecclesiastical authorities. This unique status, while vital for their operational independence, would later become a source of resentment and envy among other powerful institutions. The Templars also began to develop a sophisticated financial system. As pilgrims traveled to the Holy Land, carrying large sums of money was dangerous due to bandits and thieves. The Templars offered a solution. A pilgrim could deposit money at a Templar preceptory in their home country, receive a letter of credit, and then withdraw an equivalent sum from a Templar house in the East. This was, in essence, an early form of banking, providing a secure and efficient way to transfer funds across vast distances. They also became trusted custodians of wealth for kings and nobles, storing treasures and acting as financial intermediaries. Their reputation for integrity and their vast network of fortified houses made them the most secure banks of their era. This financial prowess, combined with their military might, transformed them into a formidable power. They were not merely a fighting force. They were an economic engine, a logistical network, and a spiritual beacon. Their influence extended far beyond the battlefield. Kings sought their counsel. Popes relied on their loyalty, and merchants trusted their financial services. However, This unprecedented rise was not without its complexities. The very privileges that enabled their growth also sowed the seeds of future discord. Their exemption from local authority, their vast wealth, and their direct allegiance to the Pope created a powerful entity that sometimes operated outside the traditional feudal structures. While their initial purpose was clear, to protect pilgrims and defend the Holy Land, their growing power and involvement in European affairs began to broaden their scope. They became involved in diplomatic missions, acted as treasurers for various monarchs, and even loaned money to kings, often at significant interest. Historians still debate the extent to which the Templar European activities distracted them from their primary mission in the Holy Land. Some argue that the resources generated in Europe were absolutely essential for sustaining the costly military operations in the Levant. Others contend that the allure of wealth and influence in the West gradually shifted their focus, leading to a decline in their spiritual fervor and military effectiveness in the East. It is a nuanced question, for the very infrastructure that allowed them to project power to the Holy Land also anchored them deeply in the secular affairs of Europe. The Templars' recruitment process was rigorous. Aspirants, often young men from noble families, underwent a period of probation. They had to be free men, not bound by marriage vows and without outstanding debts. They renounced all personal possessions upon joining and took solemn vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. Life within the order was disciplined and demanding, a stark contrast to the often indulgent lives of secular knights. They lived communally, ate simple meals, and spent significant time in prayer. Their training focused not just on martial skills, but on discipline, loyalty, and unwavering devotion to the order's cause. A lesser-known detail about their early growth is their surprising openness to accepting men from diverse backgrounds, provided they met the strict criteria. While predominantly drawn from the knightly class, the order also welcomed sergeants, who served as infantry, squires, and craftsmen, essential for the logistical support of the fighting knights. These non-knightly members, often drawn from the common populace, wore a black or brown mantle, distinguishing them from the white-clad knights, but were no less vital to the order's functioning. This multi-tiered structure allowed them to build a comprehensive military and administrative organization capable of operating on multiple fronts. The Templars' reputation for bravery and piety spread like wildfire. Tales of their courage on the battlefield, their willingness to fight to the last man, and their unwavering faith became legendary. They were often at the forefront of battles in the Holy Land, leading charges and forming the rearguard, protecting retreating forces. Their white mantles, emblazoned with the Red Cross, became a symbol of both hope and terror. Hope for those they protected, terror for those they fought. Their expansion was not merely geographical. It was also institutional. They developed a sophisticated hierarchy, with a Grand Master at its head, elected for life, who resided in the Holy Land. Beneath him were the Seneschal, the Marshal, and various commanders responsible for specific regions or aspects of the order's operations. This well-defined command structure allowed for efficient decision-making and coordination across their vast network. By the mid-12th century, less than 3 decades after their humble beginnings, the Knights Templar had transformed into one of the most powerful and influential organizations in the Latin West and the Crusader states. They commanded immense wealth, wielded significant military power, and enjoyed unparalleled spiritual authority. Their white mantle and red cross were seen on battlefields, in royal courts, and in bustling European cities. They had become a force to be reckoned with, a testament to the vision of Hugh de Paynes and the powerful endorsement of Bernard of Clairvaux and the papacy. Yet even as their power solidified, the seeds of future challenges were being sown, the very independence that allowed them to flourish would, in time, isolate them. The wealth they accumulated would inspire envy, and the unwavering loyalty they showed to the Pope would, paradoxically, make them vulnerable when papal authority itself became entangled in the complex political landscape of Europe. But for now, in the golden age of their expansion, the Knights Templar stood as a shining example of militant piety, a formidable shield for the Holy Land, and a testament to the enduring power of faith and arms combined. Their story was just beginning to unfold, a tapestry woven with threads of devotion, valor, and the relentless pursuit of a sacred cause. The whispers of the First Crusade, carried on the desert winds, had called many to arms, but few had foreseen the enduring legacy that would emerge from the dusty plains of the Holy Land. Among those early pilgrims, a new kind of warrior began to take shape, one bound not just by the sword, but by a solemn vow. It was in the early 12th century, likely around 1119, that a small group of knights, led by a nobleman named Hugh de Paynes, approached King Baldwin II of Jerusalem with a radical idea. They proposed a new order dedicated to the protection of pilgrims on the dangerous roads leading to the holy sites. The routes were rife with bandits and hostile forces, and the existing military presence was simply inadequate. These 9 knights, humble in number, offered their lives for this sacred task. Their initial dwelling was a modest one, granted by King Baldwin II, a wing of the royal palace, believed to be built upon the ruins of Solomon's Temple. This location, steeped in biblical history and ancient mystique, would forever link them to the very foundation of their name, the poor fellow soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon, or simply, the Knights Templar. For nearly a decade, they remained a small, almost anonymous group, their numbers scarcely growing. They were truly poor knights, relying on alms and the generosity of the faithful. Their red crosses, often sewn onto simple white tunics, were not yet the fearsome symbol they would become. The turning point arrived in 1129 at the Council of Troyes. This gathering, convened by Pope Honorius II, was orchestrated largely through the tireless efforts of Bernard of Clairvaux, one of the most influential figures of his age. Bernard, a Cistercian abbot and a spiritual giant, saw in the Templars not just a military necessity, but a manifestation of Christian ideals. He penned a powerful treatise, De Laude Novae Militiae, in praise of the new knighthood, which eloquently defended the concept of a monastic warrior. He argued that these knights were not merely shedding blood, but shedding sin, that their warfare was not for earthly gain, but for spiritual salvation. This theological endorsement was crucial. It legitimized their unique dual role, monks who fought and warriors who prayed. The Council of Troyes formally recognized the order, granting them a rule or code of conduct, largely drafted by Bernard himself. This rule, inspired by the Cistercian monastic tradition, laid the foundation for the Templars' extraordinary discipline and structure. It was a strict regimen, demanding poverty, chastity, and obedience. Knights were forbidden from gambling, hunting, or engaging in frivolous entertainment. Their meals were simple, often eaten in silence, listening to religious readings. They were to sleep in their tunics and breeches, ready for immediate action, and even their beards were to be kept long, a symbol of their piety and commitment. This blend of monastic rigor and military training was unprecedented. It forged an elite fighting force unlike any seen before. Beyond the fighting knights, the order developed a complex internal hierarchy. There were the sergeants, often drawn from the common ranks, who served as infantry and performed many of the logistical tasks. Then came the chaplains, essential for the spiritual well-being of the order, administering sacraments and offering guidance. Overseeing all was the Grand Master, elected for life, who wielded immense authority, answerable only to the Pope. Under him were various regional masters and commanders, each responsible for specific territories or functions. This highly organized structure allowed the Templars to operate effectively across vast distances, managing their assets and deploying their forces with remarkable efficiency. Their military prowess quickly became legendary. They were often at the vanguard of Crusader armies, renowned for their unwavering courage and discipline in battle. One of their most famous tactics was the Templar charge, a tightly packed formation of heavily armored knights thundering across the battlefield, an unstoppable force designed to shatter enemy lines. They fought with a ferocity born of conviction, believing that death in battle against the infidel guaranteed them a place in heaven. This spiritual fervor, combined with their rigorous training, made them formidable opponents. They played crucial roles in many key battles, including the Battle of Harim in 1164 and the Battle of Montgisard in 1177, where their disciplined charges often turned the tide against numerically superior forces. Yet their influence extended far beyond the battlefield. The Templars, through papal bulls and generous donations, began to accumulate vast wealth and property across Europe. Lands, castles, churches, and even entire villages were granted to them by kings, nobles, and ordinary citizens seeking spiritual merit or protection. This influx of assets, combined with their organizational acumen, led them to develop an unparalleled financial network. They became, in essence, the first multinational corporation. Their core financial innovation was the development of a sophisticated system of credit and banking. Pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land faced immense risks from theft and loss of funds. The Templars offered a solution. A pilgrim could deposit money in a Templar preceptory, a local administrative center, in, say, London or Paris, and receive a letter of credit. This letter could then be presented at another Templar house in Jerusalem or Acre, and the pilgrim would receive their funds, minus a small fee. This system, a precursor to modern banking, eliminated the need to carry large sums of cash, making travel safer and more efficient. This service wasn't limited to pilgrims. Kings and nobles, too, began to entrust the Templars with their treasuries, recognizing the order's security and trustworthiness. The Templar preceptories, with their fortified walls and disciplined guards, were safer than many royal treasuries. They acted as custodians of funds, executors of wills, and even as loan providers. They loaned money to monarchs for wars and infrastructure projects, often at reasonable interest rates, further solidifying their financial power and political influence. For instance, King Henry III of England frequently used the Templars as his bankers, depositing funds and even pawning royal jewels with them. The Templars also became expert land managers. Their vast estates across Europe were meticulously managed, generating significant income. They were pioneers in agricultural innovation, often introducing new farming techniques and crop rotation methods to maximize yields. They built mills, cultivated vineyards, and developed sophisticated irrigation systems. This economic self-sufficiency, combined with their tax exemptions granted by the Pope, allowed them to funnel immense resources back to the Holy Land, supporting their military operations and the maintenance of their formidable castles. These castles were engineering marvels, built with an understanding of both defense and logistics. They were crucial to maintaining Crusader control over key territories. Castel Pellerin, overlooking the Mediterranean coast, was a prime example, a massive, double-walled fortress designed to withstand prolonged sieges. These strongholds served not only as military outposts, but also as administrative centers for their vast estates and as secure vaults for their burgeoning wealth. However, this immense wealth and influence, while enabling their mission, also sowed the seeds of their eventual downfall. As the Crusader states in the Holy Land began to crumble, and the dream of a permanent Christian presence in the East faded, the Templars' original purpose became less clear to some. Their vast holdings in Europe, rather than their military exploits in the Levant, increasingly defined their public image. They were perceived by some as arrogant, secretive, and excessively wealthy, a powerful state within a state that answered only to the Pope. Historians still debate the precise nature of the Templars' financial operations. Were they truly a sophisticated banking institution in the modern sense, or simply highly organized custodians of wealth? While they certainly facilitated transfers of funds and provided loans, the concept of fractional reserve banking, as we understand it today, was likely not in play. Their system was more akin to a highly secure, distributed network of treasuries, where deposits in one location could be drawn upon in another, underpinned by the order's widespread trust and extensive network of preceptories. The letter of credit was more of a promissory note or a bill of exchange, enabling secure transactions rather than creating new money through lending. Regardless of the exact terminology, their financial innovations were revolutionary for their time, demonstrating an extraordinary capacity for organization and trust in an era where such mechanisms were rare. The Templars' commitment to their unique monastic military rule was unwavering, even as the political landscape shifted. They maintained their strict discipline, their distinctive white mantles with the red cross, and their reputation for courage. But the very qualities that had made them so successful, their independence, their wealth, and their direct allegiance to the Pope, would ultimately make them vulnerable. The stage was being set for a dramatic reversal of fortune, as powerful figures began to cast covetous eyes on their treasures and their influence. The whispers that had once called them to Jerusalem would soon turn into accusations, signaling the beginning of the end for this extraordinary order of warrior monks. The dust of the First Crusade had barely settled, yet the Latin kingdom of Jerusalem, a fragile jewel in a hostile landscape, found itself in constant need of guardians. It was into this crucible of faith and steel that the Knights Templar truly forged their identity, transforming from a humble band of protectors into the most formidable military order of their age. Their initial purpose, to safeguard pilgrims on the treacherous roads to the Holy City, quickly evolved. With the establishment of the Crusader states, Jerusalem, Antioch, Tripoli, and Edessa, the Templars became indispensable defenders of these newly carved Christian enclaves. Their white mantles, with the stark red cross, a common sight on battlements and in the vanguard of armies. Their headquarters, the Al-Aqsa Mosque on the Temple Mount, renamed the Temple of Solomon by the Crusaders, lent them their very name and imbued them with a profound sense of destiny. Imagine the sheer audacity, a small group of Western knights living within the very structure that had once housed the Ark of the Covenant, now tasked with holding the sacred land against all comers. From this strategic heart, their influence radiated outwards. They began to acquire vast tracts of land, not just in the Levant, but across Europe, which provided the financial bedrock for their military operations. These estates, managed by lay brothers and sergeants, funded their horses, armor, weapons, and the upkeep of their formidable castles. The Templars' military prowess was not merely a matter of numbers, though their ranks swelled significantly throughout the 12th century. It was rooted in their discipline, their unwavering courage, and a tactical doctrine honed in the unforgiving crucible of desert warfare. Unlike feudal armies, often prone to internal squabbles and desertion, the Templars were a cohesive unit, bound by strict monastic vows and a shared fervent belief in their divine mission. Their rule, penned by Bernard of Clairvaux, emphasized obedience, silence, and self-sacrifice. They were forbidden from retreating unless outnumbered 3-1, and even then, only if ordered by their commander. This unflinching resolve struck fear into the hearts of their adversaries and inspired awe in their allies. Their battlefield tactics were often characterized by a disciplined, heavy cavalry charge. Picture them, a thundering wave of armored knights, lances lowered, riding in tight formation, the sun glinting off their chainmail and polished helmets. This shock tactic, delivered with precision and ferocity, was designed to break enemy lines and sow chaos. They were also masters of defensive warfare, their castles becoming vital strongpoints across the Crusader states. Think of Croc de Chevalier, a colossal fortress in Syria, or Safed in Galilee, towering over the landscape. These were not just walls, they were complex defensive systems, designed with multiple layers of protection, formidable towers, and strategic outworks, often garrisoned by Templar knights who lived a life of constant vigilance. One of their earliest and most significant engagements, showcasing their evolving military might, was the Battle of Harim in 1164. Though ultimately a defeat for the Crusader forces, the Templars fought with their characteristic tenacity. They formed the rearguard during the retreat, attempting to cover the main army, and many perished, demonstrating their commitment to fighting to the last. This unwavering dedication, even in the face of overwhelming odds, cemented their reputation. However, it was in the Battle of Montgisard in 1177 that the Templars, under the leadership of King Baldwin IV, the Leper King, achieved one of their most celebrated victories. Saladin, the great Muslim Sultan, had invaded the Kingdom of Jerusalem with a vast army, aiming to crush the Crusader presence once and for all. Baldwin, afflicted by leprosy and barely able to ride, led a much smaller force, including a significant contingent of Templars. Against all military logic, they launched a surprise attack on Saladin's encamped army near Ramla. The Templars, forming the spearhead, charged with such ferocity that they shattered the Ayyubid forces. Saladin himself narrowly escaped, his army routed and suffering heavy casualties. This stunning victory, attributed in large part to the Templar charge, bought the Crusader states precious years of respite and became a legendary tale of Christian triumph against seemingly insurmountable odds. Yet despite their triumphs, the Templars were not invincible, and the nature of warfare in the Holy Land was relentlessly brutal. The desert climate, unfamiliar terrain, and the constant threat of ambush tested their endurance. They also faced a cunning and adaptable enemy in the various Muslim factions, particularly under the unified banner of Saladin. The Templars, alongside the Hospitallers and other Crusader forces, engaged in countless skirmishes, sieges, and pitched battles throughout the 12th century. Their military doctrine emphasized holding their ground, even when it meant certain death. This steadfastness was both their greatest strength and, at times, their tragic flaw. Consider the siege of Jacob's Ford in 1179. The Templars had constructed a fortress, Chastelet, at a vital crossing point on the Jordan River, a strategic move to control access between Acre and Damascus. Saladin, recognizing its importance, laid siege to it. Despite fierce resistance from the Templar garrison, the fortress eventually fell. The Templars inside fought to the last man, refusing to surrender. Many were captured and executed, a stark reminder of the brutal realities of the Crusades and the Templars. Refusal to yield. This stubborn resolve, while admirable in its courage, also meant that when they lost, they often lost completely, with heavy casualties. The Templars also played a crucial role in the defense of cities. When Saladin besieged Acre in 1189, a massive and prolonged struggle, Templar knights were among the most resolute defenders. They participated in sallies, manned the walls, and endured the hardships of a long siege. Their presence alone often boosted the morale of the other defenders. They were the elite, the shock troops, the last line of defense. However, the tide of the Crusades was slowly turning. The unity Saladin brought to the Muslim world was a formidable counterpoint to the often fractured Crusader leadership. The Battle of Hattin in 1187 stands as a grim testament to this shift and a catastrophic blow to the Crusader states, and by extension, the Templars. King Guy of Lusignan, against the advice of experienced commanders, led the Crusader army, including a large contingent of Templars and Hospitallers, on a forced march across the parched Galilean hills to relieve the besieged city of Tiberias. Saladin skillfully encircled and dehydrated the Christian forces. On the slopes of the twin peaks known as the Horns of Hattin, the Crusaders were utterly defeated. The heat, thirst, and relentless attacks by Saladin's archers and cavalry broke their ranks. The Templars, as always, fought with desperate courage, forming a final doomed stand around the relic of the true cross. But it was in vain. The vast majority of the Crusader army was killed or captured. Among the prisoners were the Grand Master of the Templars, Gerard de Riedfort, and the Master of the Hospitallers. Saladin, recognizing the Templars and Hospitallers as the most dangerous and unyielding of his enemies, ordered the execution of almost all the captured knights of both orders. It is said that some 200 to 300 Templar and Hospitaller knights were summarily beheaded, a chilling act that underscored the depth of the animosity and the respect Saladin held for their fighting prowess. This was not a defeat, it was an annihilation. Hattin effectively sealed the fate of the Latin Kingdom of Jerusalem. Without its main army, the kingdom was deaf. Insless, Jerusalem itself fell to Saladin just a few months later, marking the end of the First Crusader kingdom. The Templars, though decimated, were not broken. They regrouped, their resilience remarkable. They continued to hold their castles, and their European brethren sent reinforcements and funds. The Third Crusade, led by Richard the Lionheart, saw the Templars playing a vital role, particularly in the Siege of Acre and the Battle of Arsuf, where they once again formed the vanguard of the Christian army, their disciplined charge instrumental in Richard's victory over Saladin. Historians still debate the exact impact of the Templars' strict military code on their overall strategic effectiveness. While their unwavering courage and discipline were undeniable assets in battle, some scholars argue that their refusal to retreat, even in unwinnable situations, led to unnecessary losses of valuable knights and resources. Others contend that this very inflexibility was what made them so formidable, inspiring fear in their enemies and confidence in their allies. Was their ultimate downfall a consequence of their unyielding spirit, or simply the overwhelming demographic and strategic advantage of their adversaries? The truth likely lies somewhere in between, a complex interplay of factors where their strengths sometimes became their weaknesses in a constantly evolving military landscape. The Templars also possessed a surprising degree of naval power. While primarily known for their land-based military exploits, they maintained a fleet of ships, crucial for transporting men, supplies, and pilgrims between Europe and the Holy Land. Their maritime activities were extensive, operating out of ports like Acre and Tortosa. They even engaged in naval combat, protecting Christian shipping lanes and participating in blockades. This lesser-known aspect of their operations highlights their comprehensive approach to defending the Crusader states, recognizing that control of the sea was as vital as control of the land. As the 13th century dawned, the Crusader presence in the Levant became increasingly precarious. The Templars continued to fight, defending their remaining strongholds with grim determination. They participated in the later Crusades, often bearing the brunt of the fighting. Their castles, like Athlet, Chateau Pellerin, a massive coastal fortress built by the Templars, became the last bastions of Christian power. These fortresses were marvels of military engineering, designed to withstand prolonged sieges and project power. Athlet, for instance, was never taken by force. It was only evacuated when the last remnants of the Crusader states collapsed. The fall of Acre in 1291 marked the final chapter of the Crusader states and, in essence, the end of the Templars' primary mission in the Holy Land. The siege was long and brutal, with the Mamluks, the new formidable power in Egypt, bringing overwhelming force to bear. The Templars, along with the Hospitallers and other orders, fought heroically in the defense of the city. When the walls were finally breached, the remaining Templars made a desperate last stand in their fortified compound within the city, fighting to the death rather than surrendering. The Grand Master, Guillaume de Beaujeu, was killed during the fighting. The few survivors retreated to Cyprus, their dream of a Christian Holy Land shattered. The Templars' military might, their battlefield prowess, and their unwavering courage were legendary. They were the shock troops of the Crusades, the elite warriors who inspired both awe and fear. Their white mantles, emblazoned with the Red Cross, became a symbol of Christian military might in the East. They fought in countless battles, endured endless sieges, and sacrificed their lives for a cause they believed was divinely ordained. Their story is one of incredible bravery, discipline, and devotion, set against the backdrop of one of history's most prolonged and brutal conflicts. Cats. Though their mission in the Holy Land ultimately failed, their legacy as formidable warriors and defenders of the faith endures, a testament to their unique place in military history. Perhaps the echoes of their charges still whisper across the ancient battlefields of the Levant, carried on the desert winds, a silent testament to the knights who once rode beneath the banner of the Beauseant. As the crusading fervor waned in the Levant, a different kind of power began to burgeon within the Templar order, one rooted not in the clash of steel, but in the quiet accumulation of wealth. From their humble beginnings as the poor fellow soldiers of Christ, the Templars had transformed into an economic powerhouse, their influence stretching far beyond the sun-baked stones of Outremer, deep into the heart of Europe. This transformation was gradual, almost imperceptible at first, woven into the very fabric of their mission. Their vows of poverty, ironically, applied only to individual knights, not to the order itself, which was seen as a collective entity dedicated to God's work. This distinction proved pivotal. The primary wellspring of their vast fortune was, perhaps predictably, donations. Kings, queens, nobles, and common folk alike, moved by piety or a desire for spiritual merit, bestowed upon the Templars lands, money, and even entire villages. These gifts were not merely acts of charity, they were often strategic investments in salvation, a way for the wealthy to contribute to the holy war without donning armor themselves. For instance, King Louis VII of France, deeply devout, was a significant benefactor, granting the order numerous estates and privileges in the mid-12th century. These donations were not isolated incidents, but a continuous stream, reflecting the widespread respect and admiration the Templars commanded across Christendom. People believed in their mission, in their sacrifice, and in the spiritual efficacy of supporting them. Beyond outright gifts, the Templars also excelled in land management. The estates they acquired, often sprawling and strategically located, were not left fallow. Instead, the order, with its disciplined structure and sophisticated administrative capabilities, developed them into highly efficient agricultural enterprises. They introduced innovative farming techniques, built mills, vineyards, and even fish ponds, transforming unproductive tracts into profitable assets. Their granges, or monastic farms, became models of efficiency, managed by lay brothers and sergeants, generating substantial income. This meticulous approach to landholding was a hallmark of their burgeoning economic prowess, demonstrating a pragmatic streak beneath their spiritual veneer. Yet, it was in the realm of finance that the Templars truly revolutionized their economic standing, evolving into what many consider the world's first multinational banking institution. Their network of preceptories, or commanderies, spread across Europe, from England to Portugal, from France to Germany, served not only as recruitment centers and administrative hubs, but also as secure depositories for valuables. Pilgrims, merchants, and even monarchs found it safer to deposit their wealth with the Templars than to risk carrying large sums of money on dangerous journeys. The order's reputation for integrity, discipline, and security was unparalleled. This system gave rise to what we might call proto-checks, or letters of credit. A wealthy individual traveling from, say, a wealthy pilgrim? Paris to Jerusalem could deposit a sum of money with the Templars in France and receive a coded document. Upon arrival in Outremer, they could present this document to a Templar house and withdraw an equivalent sum, minus a small fee. This ingenious system eliminated the immense risks of highway robbery and made long-distance travel and trade far more feasible. It was a revolutionary concept for its time, predating modern banking practices by centuries. Imagine the relief of a merchant knowing their fortune was safe, accessible across vast distances, protected by the very knights sworn to protect pilgrims. This service was not merely convenient. It was transformative for the burgeoning European economy. Kings and nobles, too, availed themselves of Templar financial services. Monarchs often deposited their treasuries with the order, using Templar houses as royal valuables. They borrowed heavily from the Templars, especially to finance wars or grand projects, with the order acting as both lender and financial agent. For instance, King Philip IV of France, who would later turn against them, regularly used the Templars as his bankers, entrusting them with vast sums and borrowing frequently. This intimate financial relationship gave the Templars immense leverage and influence over the very rulers they served. The Templars also became experts in currency exchange, a vital service in an era of myriad local currencies. Their widespread presence and understanding of different monetary systems allowed them to facilitate international trade, further cementing their role as financial intermediaries. They even engaged in what we would now recognize as early forms of investment, often lending money to merchants and nobles, sometimes with interest. Though the charging of interest, usury, was technically forbidden by the Church. However, the Templars, like many others, found ways around this prohibition, often by charging damages for late repayment or structuring loans in ways that obscured the interest. This subtle navigation of ecclesiastical law further illustrates their sophisticated understanding of finance. Their immense wealth was not merely hoarded. A significant portion was reinvested into their military operations in the Holy Land, financing the construction and maintenance of formidable castles like Castel Pellerine, a massive coastal fortress, or the Crac des Chevaliers, though the latter was primarily hospitaller. They funded their vast network of supply lines, paid for soldiers, horses, and arms, and supported the infrastructure necessary to maintain a standing army far from home. This continuous flow of European wealth was crucial for sustaining the Crusader states for as long as they endured. The Templars' financial influence extended into the political sphere. Their wealth gave them a seat at the table in royal courts and papal councils. They acted as diplomats, negotiators, and even arbitrators in disputes between secular rulers. Their impartiality, rooted in their allegiance to the Pope alone, often made them trusted intermediaries. This political clout, however, also sowed seeds of resentment. As their wealth grew, so too did the envy and suspicion of those who saw their power as a threat. A lesser-known aspect of their financial activities was their involvement in the salt trade. Salt was a crucial commodity in the Middle Ages, essential for food preservation. The Templars controlled significant salt pans, particularly in Cyprus and along the Mediterranean coast, generating substantial income from this vital trade. This demonstrates their diversification beyond traditional landholding and banking, showcasing their shrewd business acumen. However, the question of just how wealthy the Templars truly were remains a subject of scholarly debate. While contemporary accounts and later historical analyses certainly paint a picture of immense riches, pinpointing exact figures is incredibly difficult. Records were often fragmented, and the nature of medieval accounting was far less precise than modern systems. Historians still disagree on whether the Templars were truly the wealthiest organization in Europe, or if their wealth was simply more visible and centralized than that of, say, the Benedictine order, which also held vast tracts of land. Some argue that while their liquid assets and banking operations were unparalleled, their overall landholdings might have been rivaled by other monastic orders. Nevertheless, the perception of their immense wealth was undeniable, and perception, in this case, was perhaps more potent than precise figures. This vast accumulation of wealth, this intricate web of financial services, and this pervasive influence transformed the Templars from a band of warrior monks into a powerful, almost sovereign entity within Christendom. They operated with a degree of autonomy that few other organizations could match, answerable only to the Pope. This unique position, however, became a double-edged sword. While it granted them immense power and facilitated their mission, it also made them a tempting target. As the crusading ideal began to wane, and the Holy Land slipped from Christian hands, the immense wealth and privilege of the Templars, once seen as a blessing, began to be viewed with increasing suspicion and covetousness by powerful secular rulers, particularly the ambitious King Philip IV of France, whose own treasury was perpetually depleted. The very foundation of their strength would, in time, become the catalyst for their dramatic downfall. The whispers of their riches, once a testament to their divine favor, would soon turn into accusations of avarice and heresy. The vibrant tapestry of the Crusader states, woven with threads of fervent belief and martial might, began to fray as the 13th century unfurled its banners. The initial fervor, which had propelled knights across vast distances and established these Christian enclaves in a predominantly Muslim land, gradually waned. The Kingdom of Jerusalem, once a beacon of Crusader ambition, found its territories shrinking, its political landscape increasingly fragmented by internal squabbles and the shifting alliances of European potentates. The very concept of the Holy Land seemed to recede, becoming more of a distant ideal than a tangible, defensible reality. For the Knights Templar, this period was one of profound transformation, both in their outward purpose and their inner character. Their initial mandate, to protect pilgrims and defend the Holy Land, remained. Yet the nature of that defense evolved. The great sieges and pitched battles of the earlier Crusades gave way to a more entrenched, often desperate, struggle to hold on to what remained. Their castles, once symbols of impregnable strength, became isolated strongholds in a hostile sea. The imposing Crac des Chevaliers, a fortress so immense it seemed carved from the very mountains, and the formidable Safed, perched high above the Galilean landscape, stood as testaments to their engineering prowess and strategic acumen. Yet even these bastions could not stem the tide indefinitely. The Mamluks, a powerful military caste that had risen to prominence in Egypt, emerged as the most formidable adversary to the Crusader states. Their leaders, figures like Sultan Baybars and his successor Kalawun, were determined to expel the Franks from the Levant once and for all. Their campaigns were relentless, marked by methodical sieges and a strategic brilliance that often outmaneuvered the fragmented Crusader forces. The fall of Antioch in 1268 to Baybars was a devastating blow. A city that had been a Crusader stronghold for over 170 years. Its capture sent a shiver of dread through the remaining Christian enclaves, signaling that no city, however fortified, was truly safe. The Templars, who had valiantly defended parts of the city, suffered heavy losses, their ranks thinned by the sustained warfare. As the military situation deteriorated, the Templars found themselves increasingly involved in the financial and political affairs of Europe. Their vast network of preceptories and commanderies, initially established to raise funds and recruits for the Holy Land, had grown into a sophisticated financial system. They became bankers to kings and popes, holding immense wealth and managing complex transactions across the continent. This shift, while necessary for their survival and the funding of their military efforts, began to subtly alter their identity. The austere warrior monks of the early days, dedicated solely to the sword and the cross, now found themselves entangled in the intricate web of European power politics. Historians still debate whether this financial prowess was a distraction that ultimately weakened their military focus, or a vital necessity that allowed them to sustain their efforts in the Holy Land for as long as they did. Perhaps it was both, a double-edged sword that provided resources but also drew them further from their original, simpler vows. The loss of Tripoli in 1289 was another catastrophic event. This bustling port city, a major center for trade and a vital link to Europe, fell to Sultan Kalawun after a brutal siege. The Templars, along with other military orders, fought fiercely, but the sheer numerical superiority of the Mamluk forces proved overwhelming. The city's fall left Acre as the last significant Crusader stronghold, a final bastion clinging precariously to the coastline. The atmosphere in Acre in the late 1280s must have been heavy with a sense of impending doom, a palpable tension as the Mamluk shadow loomed larger with each passing year. The final act of this long, drawn-out drama unfolded in 1291 with the Siege of Acre. This was not merely a battle for a city. It was the last stand of the Crusader states in the Levant. Acre, a vibrant, cosmopolitan city, was home to a diverse population of Franks, native Christians, Muslims, and Jews. Its streets teemed with merchants, pilgrims, and soldiers, a microcosm of the Crusader world. The city's defenses were formidable, but the Mamluk army under Sultan al-Ashraf Khalil was immense, reportedly numbering over 100,000 men, equipped with powerful siege engines that dwarfed anything seen before. The Templars, along with the Hospitallers, the Teutonic Knights, and other defenders, were outnumbered perhaps 10 to 1. The siege began in April, a relentless assault of catapults and sappers undermining the city walls. The defenders, though valiant, were exhausted and demoralized by years of constant warfare and the dwindling prospects of European aid. The Templars, under the command of their Grand Master Guillaume de Beaujeu, fought with desperate courage. They defended their quarter of the city, the strongholds of their order, with a ferocity born of desperation. One lesser-known detail from the siege is the story of the Lion Gate, a section of Acre's defenses that was particularly heavily contested. The Templars mounted several counterattacks from this gate, often fighting hand-to-hand in the breaches, their white mantles stained with dust and blood. As the walls crumbled and the Mamluk forces poured into the city, the fighting became a chaotic, brutal struggle in the narrow streets. Grand Master Guillaume de Beaujeu was mortally wounded during the final assault, a devastating blow to the morale of the defenders. The last remnants of the Templar garrison, along with other knights and civilians, retreated to the Templar fortress on the seaward side of Acre, a formidable structure designed to withstand prolonged sieges. For 10 more days, they held out, surrounded by the victorious Mamluk army. Perhaps these walls, battered and scarred, whispered stories of the Templars' long history in the Holy Land, of their initial vows, and of the centuries of struggle that had led to this final, desperate moment. Ultimately, the Templar fortress too succumbed. Some accounts suggest the Mamluks undermined the walls, causing a collapse that buried many of the remaining defenders. Others speak of a final, desperate naval evacuation, with a few Templars escaping by sea. Regardless of the exact sequence of events, the fall of Acre on May 18, 1291, marked the definitive end of the Crusader presence in the Levant. It was a moment of profound significance, closing a chapter that had lasted nearly 2 centuries. With the loss of Acre, the Templars, along with the other military orders, were forced to retreat from the Holy Land. Their primary purpose, the defense of Jerusalem and its pilgrimage routes, was now rendered moot. They relocated their headquarters, first to Cyprus, then later, for the Templars, back to Europe. This displacement was not merely geographical. It was an existential crisis, an order forged in the fires of the Crusades, dedicated to a specific mission in a specific land, now found itself without that land, and without that clear, immediate purpose. The Templars' vast wealth and extensive network of properties in Europe, once a source of strength, now became a vulnerability. Without the urgent, unifying cause of the Holy Land, their immense resources and perceived independence began to attract the envious gaze of powerful European monarchs, particularly King Philip IV of France. The narrative of their decline, therefore, shifts from the battlefields of the Levant to the political intrigues of the European courts. The very success of their financial operations, their role as international bankers, and their perceived aloofness from secular authority would ultimately contribute to their downfall. The echoes of their former glory finish. Their immense courage in battle and their unwavering dedication to their vows in the Holy Land would soon be overshadowed by accusations and a tragic end. But that is a story for another time. For now, the sun set on their crusading era, leaving behind only the ghosts of castles and the whisper of forgotten prayers on the Levantine winds. The sun, a weary traveler itself, dipped below the western horizon, casting long skeletal shadows across the fields of France. For the Knights Templar, the crusading fervor that had once burned so brightly was now a flickering ember. The Holy Land, that distant, sun-baked stage for their grandest dramas, had slipped from their grasp. Acre, the last bastion, had fallen in 1291, a wound that would never truly heal. Those who survived the bloody siege, the shattered remnants of an order forged in the fires of devotion and war, began the long, arduous journey back to Europe. They were no longer the triumphant heroes of earlier crusades, but men bearing the scars of defeat, carrying the weight of a lost cause. Their return was not met with the unbridled adoration they had once known. Europe, too, had changed. The initial wave of pious enthusiasm for the Crusades had receded, replaced by a more pragmatic, even cynical, outlook. Monarchs, once eager to champion the Templars' cause, now eyed their wealth and influence with growing suspicion. The order, established in 1119, had amassed an astonishing fortune over 2 centuries. Their network of preceptories, stretching from Portugal to Poland, functioned as a sophisticated banking system, lending money to kings and nobles, facilitating trade, and even acting as treasurers for various royal houses. This financial prowess, once a source of strength, now became a dangerous liability. Imagine a king, perpetually in need of funds for wars or lavish court expenses, looking upon the Templars' vast treasuries. Philip IV of France, known as Philip the Fair, was precisely such a monarch. He was a man of cold ambition, constantly seeking to consolidate royal power and fill his coffers. His gaze, sharp and calculating, fell upon the Templars' wealth like a predator spotting its prey. The Templars, for their part, had grown somewhat complacent in their European strongholds. While their military discipline remained, the urgency that had defined their early years in Jerusalem had softened. They lived in relative comfort, their lands productive, their coffers full. This visible prosperity, coupled with their perceived aloofness and their unique status, answerable only to the Pope, fueled resentment among the secular nobility, and even within parts of the church hierarchy. Whispers began to circulate, insidious and persistent, like tendrils of smoke curling through a crowded hall. These whispers spoke of secret rites, of idol worship, of spitting on the cross, and of unspeakable acts committed behind the closed doors of Templar preceptories. It's important to remember that such accusations were not entirely new. Similar charges had been leveled against other monastic orders throughout history, often by those seeking to undermine their power or seize their assets. However, in the case of the Templars, these rumors gained traction, amplified by the anxieties of the age and the machinations of powerful individuals. One of the more obscure details that contributed to the rising tide of suspicion was the Templars' perceived lack of immediate military purpose in Europe. While they still maintained garrisons and protected pilgrim routes, the grand crusading objective that had justified their existence in the eyes of many had vanished. What then was the purpose of such a powerful, wealthy, and independent organization? This question lingered in the minds of many, ripe for exploitation by those with ulterior motives. Philip IV, deeply indebted to the Templars, saw an opportunity. He had already demonstrated his willingness to challenge papal authority, notably in his conflict with Pope Boniface VIII. The Templars, with their immense wealth and their allegiance to the Pope rather than to any single monarch, represented a significant obstacle to his vision of an absolute monarchy in France. He began to lay the groundwork for their downfall with meticulous, chilling precision. His advisors, particularly Gil, Homme de Nogare, a shrewd and ruthless jurist, were instrumental in orchestrating the campaign against the order. The accusations against the Templars were not entirely fabricated from thin air, but rather built upon existing fears and prejudices. The secrecy surrounding their initiation rites, designed to protect the order's internal workings and foster loyalty, was easily twisted into something sinister. The charges ranged from heresy and idolatry to sodomy and financial corruption. One of the most infamous accusations was the worship of a mysterious idol known as Baphomet. Historians still disagree whether this was a genuine, albeit misunderstood, part of Templar ritual, a complete fabrication, or perhaps a misinterpretation of a word or symbol. Some scholars suggest it might have been a corruption of Muhammad, reflecting an accusation of syncretism or even apostasy, while others believe it was a deliberate invention designed to shock and condemn. The truth remains shrouded in the mists of time, a tantalizing mystery that continues to fuel speculation. The Pope at the time, Clement V, was a Frenchman, and crucially, he was largely under Philip IV's influence, having relocated the papacy to Avignon. This geographic shift, known as the Avignon Papacy, significantly weakened the Pope's ability to resist Philip's demands. Clement V, initially hesitant to move against an order that had served the Church for centuries, found himself in an increasingly untenable position. Philip's pressure was relentless, and the French king presented what he claimed was irrefutable evidence of the Templars' guilt. On Friday, October 13, 1307, a date forever etched in infamy, Philip IV unleashed his meticulously planned attack. Across France at dawn, royal agents simultaneously arrested hundreds of Templars, including their Grand Master, Jacques de Molay. The arrests were carried out with swift, brutal efficiency, catching the knights completely by surprise. Imagine the scene: the quiet dawn broken by the thunder of hooves, the sudden pounding on monastery doors, the bewildered faces of knights dragged from their beds. Their sacred vows and noble purpose now twisted into a narrative of heresy and betrayal. The arrested Templars were subjected to horrific torture, designed to extract confessions. Sleep deprivation, starvation, waterboarding, and the rack were common tools used to break their will. Under such duress, many confessed to the outlandish charges leveled against them. These confessions, often contradictory and recanted later, were then used as proof of the order's widespread corruption. It was a vicious cycle. Torture produced confessions, and confessions justified further torture and arrests. The trials that followed were a travesty of justice. The Templars were denied proper legal representation, and their confessions, extracted under duress, were presented as undeniable evidence. Despite the overwhelming pressure, some Templars bravely recanted their forced confessions, proclaiming their innocence and the purity of their order. These recantations, however, were often met with even more severe punishment, including burning at the stake as relapsed heretics. The spectacle of the trials, designed to shock and awe the public, further cemented the image of the Templars as a corrupt and dangerous organization. The accusations, once whispers, now screamed from official pronouncements. The once revered white mantle with its red cross, a symbol of purity and sacrifice, was now stained with the brush of infamy. Pope Clement V, caught between his duty to protect a papal order and the immense pressure from Philip IV, eventually succumbed. In 1312, under immense duress and political maneuvering, he issued the papal bull Vox in Excelso, formally suppressing the order of the Knights Templar. The bull did not explicitly condemn the Templars for heresy, but rather stated that the order was being dissolved for the greater good of The Church, due to the scandal and the impossibility of restoring its good name. This subtle distinction, perhaps a final, desperate attempt by the Pope to avoid outright condemnation, was largely lost in the sweeping tide of events. The vast wealth of the Templars, their lands, castles, and treasuries, was ostensibly transferred to the Order of the Hospitallers, another prominent military order. However, in reality, much of it was seized by Philip IV and other European monarchs, who conveniently borrowed heavily from the newly acquired assets. The Hospitallers, for their part, found themselves burdened with the Templars' debts and often had to pay large sums to the kings for the privilege of taking over the Templar properties. It was a complex, tangled web of financial maneuvering, with the kings emerging as the primary beneficiaries. The final act of this tragic drama unfolded on March 18, 1314. Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master, along with Geoffroy de Charny, the preceptor of Normandy, were brought before a commission on a small island in the Seine, in front of Notre Dame Cathedral. After years of imprisonment and torture, they were expected to reaffirm their confessions and receive life imprisonment. However, in a moment of extraordinary courage, both men publicly recanted their confessions, proclaiming their innocence and the purity of the Templar order. Their defiance sealed their fate. Philip IV, enraged by this public challenge to his authority, immediately ordered them to be burned at the stake as relapsed heretics. As the flames consumed them, legend has it that Jacques de Molay cried out a curse, summoning both Philip IV and Pope Clement V to meet him before God's judgment within a year. Whether this curse was truly uttered or became a powerful myth, its chilling prophecy came true. Pope Clement V died a month later, and Philip IV followed him to the grave before the year was out. The fall of the Templars sent shockwaves across Europe. It demonstrated the immense power of a determined monarch to crush even the most venerable institutions, and it left a lasting scar on the reputation of both the French monarchy and the papacy. The image of the valiant Crusader, once synonymous with the Templar Knight, was shattered, replaced by a narrative of heresy and corruption. Yet, even in their destruction, the Templars left an indelible mark on history. Their legacy, shrouded in mystery and speculation, continues to fascinate and intrigue. Perhaps their true wealth was not gold or land, but the enduring power of their story, a tale of faith, power, and ultimate betrayal, whispered across the centuries like the rustling leaves in an ancient, forgotten forest. The air in the early autumn of 1307 carried a chill that seemed to seep not just into the bones, but into the very spirit of France. For years, the kingdom had been under the tightening grip of Philip IV, known to some as Philip the Fair, a monarch whose ambition was as vast as his treasury was empty. His reign had been marked by a relentless pursuit of power and wealth, often at the expense of established institutions. He had already challenged the papacy, even orchestrating the infamous outrage of Anagni against Pope Boniface VIII, and had expelled the Jews from France in 1306, seizing their assets to replenish his coffers. Now his gaze, sharp and unyielding, had fallen upon the Knights Templar. The Templars, once the darlings of Christendom, protectors of pilgrims and formidable warriors, had, by the dawn of the 14th century, become something more complex. Their military role in the Holy Land had largely diminished after the fall of Acre in 1291, the last Crusader stronghold. They had retreated to their European commanderies, their vast network of lands, castles, and financial operations continuing to thrive. They were, in essence, the bankers of Europe, their system of credit and letters of exchange facilitating trade and even financing royal endeavors. This immense wealth, coupled with their unique status as an order answerable only to the Pope, made them a tempting target for a king like Philip, who was perpetually in debt. The seeds of their destruction were sown in whispers and accusations, cultivated in the shadows of the royal court. Philip, a master manipulator, understood the power of propaganda. He began to circulate rumors, insidious and pervasive, that the Templars were not merely wealthy, but corrupt, heretical, and engaged in unspeakable acts. These were not new accusations. Similar charges had been leveled against other powerful groups throughout history. But Philip had a singular determination and the machinery of a nascent state at his disposal. The king's chief minister, Guillaume de Nogaret, a man of formidable legal skill and ruthless efficiency, became the architect of the Templars' downfall. Nogaret, who had played a key role in the confrontation with Boniface VIII, was adept at crafting legal pretexts for royal actions. He understood that to seize the Templars' assets, a justification beyond mere financial need was required, one that would resonate with the religious fervor of the age and legitimize the king's actions in the eyes of the populace, and crucially, the Pope. The accusations against the Templars were truly shocking: spitting on the cross, denying Christ, worshipping an idol, often referred to as Baphomet, engaging in sodomy, and even ritualistic cannibalism. These charges, outlandish as they seem today, tapped into deep-seated fears and superstitions of the time. They were designed to strip the Templars of their moral authority and turn public opinion against them. Historians still debate the precise origin of these specific accusations. Some believe they were entirely fabricated by Philip's agents, perhaps drawing on existing anti-heretical tropes. Others suggest that certain practices, misinterpreted or exaggerated, might have existed within some isolated commanderies, perhaps as secret initiation rites, though this remains highly speculative. The truth is likely a complex tapestry of deliberate falsehoods woven around a core of suspicion and misunderstanding. Philip's plan was meticulously orchestrated and executed with breathtaking speed and secrecy. He dispatched sealed orders to his seneschals and bailiffs across France, instructing them to open the letters simultaneously on a specific date. That date was Friday, October the 13th, 1307. The choice of Friday the 13th is often cited as the origin of the superstition surrounding the date, a testament to the lasting impact of this event. On that fateful morning, across the length and breadth of France, royal officers descended upon Templar preceptories, castles, and houses. The element of surprise was complete. The knights, accustomed to their privileged status and protected by papal bulls, were caught entirely unawares. They were arrested in their beds, in their chapels, in their administrative offices. Among the first to be seized was Jacques de Molay, the Grand Master himself, who was in Paris at the time, having been summoned by the Pope to discuss a potential new crusade and the merger of the military orders. The arrests were carried out with brutal efficiency. Thousands of Templars, from the highest-ranking knights to the humblest sergeants and chaplains, were rounded up. Their properties, including their vast financial records, were immediately seized by royal agents. This was not merely an arrest, it was a hostile takeover. The sheer scale and coordination of the operation were unprecedented for the time, demonstrating Philip's remarkable administrative capacity and his unwavering resolve. Following the arrests, the Templars were subjected to brutal interrogations. Torture was widely employed to extract confessions. The methods were horrific: strappado, the rack, and perhaps most famously, the estrapade, where victims were suspended by their wrists, often with weights attached to their feet, dislocating their limbs. Confessions, however coerced, were essential to Philip's legal strategy. They would provide the proof needed to condemn the order and justify the seizure of their assets. Under such duress, many Templars confessed to the charges, often repeating the accusations put to them by their interrogators. These confessions, however, were frequently contradictory and often recanted once the torture ceased. For instance, some knights confessed to spitting on the cross, but then described doing so only symbolically, as a test of obedience under duress during their initiation, or as a way to prepare them for potential capture by infidels, where they might be forced to deny their faith. Others confessed to worshipping a head, but descriptions of this idol varied wildly, from a cat to a bearded man, suggesting no consistent object of veneration. The Pope at the time was Clement V. He was a Frenchman, a former Archbishop of Bordeaux, and widely seen as being under Philip IV's influence. Clement was initially outraged by Philip's unilateral action, seeing it as a direct challenge to papal authority, as the Templars were directly subject to the Holy See. He issued a bull, Pastoralis Praementiae, on November 22, 1307, ordering the arrest of Templars throughout Christendom, but also asserting his own jurisdiction over the order and reserving the right to judge them. However, Philip had already set the wheels in motion, and the sheer volume of confessions he had extracted put immense pressure on the Pope. The trials began, not in ecclesiastical courts as the Pope would have preferred, but under the jurisdiction of the royal inquisitors. These were not fair trials in any modern sense. The accused were often denied legal counsel, faced secret accusers, and were presumed guilty. The confessions obtained under torture were presented as irrefutable evidence. One of the lesser-known details of this period is the fate of the Templar fleet. The order possessed a significant navy, used for transporting pilgrims and goods across the Mediterranean. When the arrests began, many Templar ships simply vanished from their ports. While some historians speculate about a grand escape of treasure or high-ranking Templars, it is more likely that these ships, seeing the writing on the wall, simply dispersed, their crews either abandoning them or sailing them to friendly territories where the King of France held no sway. The fate of any treasure they might have carried remains one of history's enduring mysteries, fueling countless legends of hidden Templar gold. As the trials dragged on, a new phase began. In 1309, Pope Clement V, having relocated the papal court to Avignon, a city then within the Holy Roman Empire but close to French territory, began his own investigation. He ordered the Templars to be brought before papal commissions, giving them a chance to defend themselves. Many Templars, having recanted their initial confessions, now bravely stood before these commissions, proclaiming their innocence and detailing the tortures they had endured. This public recantation infuriated Philip. To counter this, Philip's agents began to apply pressure directly. In May 1310, Philip intervened directly in the papal process. He ordered the Archbishop of Sens, Philip de Marigny, a brother of Philip IV's chamberlain, Enguerrand de Marigny, to preside over a provincial council in Paris. This council, acting under royal influence, condemned 54 Templars who had recanted their confessions as relapsed heretics. They were handed over to the secular arm and burned at the stake outside Paris. This brutal act sent a chilling message: recant your confession and you will die. It effectively silenced many who might have otherwise spoken out in their defense, demonstrating the king's absolute ruthlessness. The pressure on Pope Clement V became unbearable. Faced with Philip's unwavering determination, the threat of schism, and the public spectacle of the Templars' alleged heresies, Clement was forced to act. In 1312, at the Council of Vienne, a general council of the Church, Pope Clement V issued the papal bull Vox in Excelso. This bull formally suppressed the Order of the Temple, not by condemning them for heresy, but by way of ordinance or provision, per modum provisionis sui ordinationis. Clement stated that while there was not sufficient proof to definitively condemn the order for heresy, their reputation had been so irrevocably damaged that they could no longer effectively serve the Church. The order was dissolved, its property to be transferred to the Order of the Hospital of St. John of Jerusalem, the Knights Hospitaller. However, Philip IV, ever the pragmatist, had already seized the vast majority of the Templar assets in France. While the Pope's bull nominally transferred the wealth to the Hospitallers, the process of transferring these assets was painstakingly slow and often incomplete. Philip ensured that a substantial portion of the Templar wealth in France remained in royal hands, ostensibly to cover the costs of the trials and the protection of the Templar properties. The financial gain for the French crown, though perhaps not as immense as Philip had initially hoped, was still significant. The suppression of the Templars marked a turning point in the relationship between secular power and the Church. It demonstrated the growing strength of national monarchies and their willingness to challenge even the most powerful institutions of the medieval world. The memory of the Templars, their dramatic fall, and the lingering questions about their guilt or innocence would echo through the centuries, giving rise to countless legends and inspiring secret societies. Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master, along with Geoffrey de Charny, the preceptor of Normandy, endured years of imprisonment and interrogation. In March 1314, they were brought before a papal commission in Paris. Despite their earlier confessions under torture, they now publicly recanted, proclaiming their innocence and the innocence of the order. This act of defiance sealed their fate. Philip IV, enraged, immediately ordered them to be burned at the stake as relapsed heretics. On an island in the Seine River, in front of Notre Dame Cathedral, Jacques de Molay and Geoffrey de Charny met their end. As the flames consumed him, legend has it that Molay cried out, cursing both Pope Clement V and King Philip IV, summoning them to meet him before God's judgment within a year. Whether these words were truly spoken or merely a later embellishment, both Clement and Philip indeed died within months of Molay's execution, adding a chilling postscript to the Templars' tragic end and fueling the mystique that would forever surround the order. The ashes of the Templars scattered on the wind, but their story, one of faith, power, and betrayal, had only just begun its long journey through history. The chill of October 1307 descended upon France, not with the gentle whispers of autumn, but with the sudden, brutal shock of mass arrests. As dawn broke on Friday the 13th, royal agents, armed with sealed orders from King Philip IV, descended upon Templar preceptories across the kingdom. Knights, roused from their sleep or caught in their morning prayers, were seized without warning. The charges, read aloud in the cold light of day, were as shocking as they were numerous: heresy, idolatry, sodomy, sacrilege, and a litany of other offenses that painted the once venerated order as a den of depravity. The sheer scale of the operation was unprecedented. Hundreds of Templars, from the humblest sergeants to the highest-ranking commanders, were imprisoned within hours. Among those arrested was Jacques de Molay, the Grand Master himself, seized in Paris. He had been in the city for the funeral of Catherine of Courtenay, the titular Empress of Constantinople, and had even been a pallbearer for the king's sister-in-law. This proximity to the royal court and his apparent lack of suspicion highlights the cunning deception employed by Philip IV. The arrests were not random. They were meticulously planned, a testament to the king's determination to dismantle the order and seize its immense wealth. The Templar strongholds, once symbols of their power and piety, became their prisons, their treasures confiscated, their lands seized. The accusations themselves were outlandish, yet crafted with a chilling precision, designed to ignite public outrage and justify the king's actions. Templars were accused of spitting on the cross during their initiation ceremonies, of denying Christ, of worshipping an idol known as Baphomet, and of engaging in unspeakable acts of immorality. These charges, though widely circulated, were largely based on the testimony of a few disgruntled former members, most notably a renegade Templar named Esquin de Floyren, who had been expelled from the order years prior. His motives remain debated by historians. Some see him as a genuine informant, others as a pawn in Philip's grand scheme, perhaps even fabricating claims for personal gain or revenge. The immediate aftermath of the arrests saw the beginning of the interrogations, and with them, the introduction of torture. Philip IV, having previously used similar tactics against Pope Boniface VIII and the Bishop of Pamiers, was no stranger to such methods. The Dominicans, serving as inquisitors, were tasked with extracting confessions. The methods employed were brutal and systematic: strappado, the rack, foot roasting, and the application of thumb screws. Imagine the terror of a knight, accustomed to the battlefield, now bound and helpless, facing instruments designed to inflict unimaginable pain. The air in the interrogation chambers would have been thick with the smell of sweat, fear, and the metallic tang of blood. Under such duress, confessions were inevitable. Many Templars, broken by torment, admitted to the charges, no matter how absurd. They confessed to spitting on the cross, not out of malice, but as a symbolic act of renunciation of worldly ties, a perverse test of obedience to the order. They confessed to kissing the posterior of their superiors, a grotesque parody of fealty. Some even described the idol Baphomet as a bearded head, a cat, or even a demon. These confessions, extracted under duress, were then used to justify further arrests and to condemn those who continued to deny their guilt. The trials that followed were a travesty of justice. The Templars were denied legal representation, their confessions were deemed sufficient proof, and their appeals were largely ignored. Pope Clement V, initially hesitant and even outraged by Philip's unilateral actions, found himself in an increasingly precarious position. He had been elected pope largely due to Philip's influence and was now residing in Avignon, under the shadow of the French monarchy. While Clement T initially ordered his own investigation and even suspended the inquisitors, the pressure from Philip was immense. The king threatened to launch a full-scale crusade against the papacy if Clement did not cooperate, effectively holding the church hostage. The papal investigation did reveal some inconsistencies. When Templars were interrogated by papal inquisitors without the use of torture, many recanted their earlier confessions, proclaiming their innocence and detailing the horrific methods used to extract their false admissions. One night, Aimery de Villiers-le-Duc recounted how he had been tortured to the point of near death. His feet burned until the bones fell out. He stated that he would have confessed to killing God himself if it would have stopped the pain. Such testimonies, though harrowing, did little to sway the king or his determined inquisitors. The public spectacle of these trials was a key part of Philip's strategy. He orchestrated public sermons and processions, painting the Templars as monstrous heretics, thus garnering popular support for their suppression. The image of the pious Crusader, once revered, was systematically dismantled and replaced with one of a secretive, corrupt, and blasphemous organization. This propaganda campaign was highly effective, turning public opinion against an order that had once enjoyed immense prestige and popular admiration. One of the enduring mysteries surrounding the Templar trials is the true nature of their initiation rituals. while the confessions under torture described spitting on the cross and other blasphemous acts. Historians still disagree whether these were genuine, albeit highly unorthodox elements of their secret ceremonies, or purely fabricated accusations designed to discredit them. Some scholars suggest that a symbolic renunciation of Christ might have been a test of absolute obedience, a dark echo of Peter's denial, designed to prepare knights for the ultimate sacrifice in battle, or perhaps even a strange, misguided attempt to empathize with the suffering of early Christians under Roman persecution. Others argue that the Templars, as a military order operating in close proximity to various religious sects in the Holy Land, might have adopted certain esoteric practices that were misunderstood or deliberately misrepresented by their accusers. The truth remains elusive, buried beneath centuries of speculation and the undeniable trauma of the trials. The trials culminated in a series of executions. In May 1310, 54 Templars were burned at the stake outside Paris, having recanted their forced confessions and declared their innocence. Their defiant cries of innocence, echoing through the smoky air, served as a stark reminder of the injustice being perpetrated. These executions were meant to intimidate, to silence any further recantations, and to send a clear message: resistance was futile. The fate of Jacques de Molay and 3 other senior officials, Hugues de Perraud, Geoffrey de Gonville, and Geoffrey de Charny, was drawn out. They were held for years, subjected to repeated interrogations. In March 1314, after years of imprisonment and torture, they were brought before a papal commission in Paris. To the astonishment of all present, Molay and Charny, who had previously confessed under torture, publicly recanted their confessions, proclaiming their innocence and the purity of the order. This public defiance sealed their fate. Philip IV, enraged by their recantation, immediately ordered their execution. On March 18, 1314, Jacques de Molay and Geoffrey de Charny were burned at the stake on the Île aux Juifs, a small island in the Seine, within sight of Notre Dame Cathedral. As the flames consumed him, legend has it that Jacques de Molay cried out, cursing both Pope Clement V and King Philip IV, summoning them to meet him before God's judgment within a year and a day. Whether these words were truly uttered or later fabricated, they quickly became a powerful part of the Templar myth. Indeed, both Clement and Philip died within the year, adding a chilling supernatural dimension to the already tragic end of the order. Clement V died a month later, in April 1314, reportedly of dysentery. Philip IV followed in November 1314 after a hunting accident. The trials of the Templars represent a dark chapter in medieval history, a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked power and the devastating consequences of political ambition. The order, once a beacon of faith and military prowess, was systematically destroyed, its reputation tarnished, its members persecuted, and its wealth seized. The events of those years reverberated across Europe, leaving a legacy of suspicion and intrigue that continues to fascinate and perplex historians to this day. The accusations, the torture, the forced confessions, and the ultimate destruction of the Knights Templar serve as a cautionary tale, a testament to how easily truth can be distorted and justice perverted in the pursuit of power and wealth. The whispers of their trials, the echoes of their cries of innocence, still seem to hang in the air, a melancholic reminder of a once mighty order brought to its knees. The whispers of suspicion, once faint, grew into a roaring gale that swept through the courts of Europe. King Philip IV of France, known as Philip the Fair, harbored a deep-seated animosity towards the Templars, fueled by a mixture of envy, financial desperation, and perhaps genuine fear of their immense power and autonomy. He owed the order vast sums of money, loans taken to finance his wars, and their wealth was a glittering, irresistible prize. Furthermore, the Templars, with their direct allegiance to the Pope and their own internal legal system, stood as a formidable challenge to his burgeoning concept of a centralized, sovereign French monarchy. On Friday, October 13th, 1307, a date forever etched in the annals of history, Philip unleashed his meticulously planned strike. Across France, at dawn, royal agents simultaneously opened sealed orders, arresting every Templar they could find. The charges were sensational, designed to shock and discredit: heresy, idolatry, spitting on the cross, worshipping a demon idol known as Baphomet, engaging in sodomy, and various other blasphemies. These accusations, many of which mirrored those leveled against other perceived enemies of the crown, were almost certainly fabricated or extracted under duress. The speed and coordination of the arrests were unprecedented, a testament to Philip's ruthless efficiency. The ensuing interrogations were brutal. Under torture, many Templars confessed to the outlandish charges, their bodies broken, their wills shattered. The inquisitors, often working in concert with royal officials, were relentless. Jacques de Molay, the Grand Master, initially confessed under torture, only to later recant, a brave act that sealed his fate. These confessions, however extracted, provided Philip with the justification he needed to press his case against the order. Pope Clement V, a Frenchman himself and heavily influenced by Philip, found himself in an impossible position. Though initially reluctant to condemn an order that had served the Church for centuries, he was eventually pressured into dissolving the Templars. At the Council of Vienne in 1312, after much deliberation and against the wishes of many council members who found the evidence inconclusive, Clement formally suppressed the order through the papal bull Vox in Excelso. He did not, however, condemn them for heresy, but rather dissolve them with a heavy heart, not by definitive sentence, but by apostolic provision, citing the scandal and the damage to the Church's reputation. The vast wealth of the Templars, the very prize Philip coveted, was officially transferred to the Knights Hospitaller, another prominent military order. However, much of it, particularly in France, was seized by the crown, effectively enriching Philip's treasury. Lands, castles, and movable goods were systematically confiscated, though the true extent of the Templar treasury has always been a subject of intense speculation and enduring mystery. Did they have secret hoards, perhaps even the Holy Grail or the Ark of the Covenant, as later legends would suggest? Historians largely agree that while the Templars were undoubtedly wealthy, the tales of unimaginable hidden treasures are more myth than reality, likely fueled by the secrecy surrounding their financial operations and the king's propaganda. The final act of this tragic drama unfolded on March 18, 1314. Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master, along with Geoffroy de Charny, the preceptor of Normandy, and other senior Templar officials, were brought before a scaffold erected on the Île aux Juifs, a small island in the Seine River in Paris. They were meant to reaffirm their confessions and receive life imprisonment. Instead, to the astonishment of all present, both de Molay and de Charny publicly recanted their confessions, declaring their innocence and the innocence of the order, proclaiming that the charges were false and that they had only confessed under duress. The defiant act enraged Philip. Without consulting the Pope, he immediately ordered their execution. That very day, as dusk settled over Paris, Jacques de Molay and Geoffroy de Charny were burned at the stake. Legend holds that as the flames consumed him, de Molay cried out, cursing both Pope Clement and King Philip, summoning them to meet him before God's judgment within a year and a day. Whether these words were truly uttered or later embellished, both Clement and Philip indeed died within that time frame, adding a chilling supernatural dimension to the Templars' demise and fueling the popular belief in de Molay's curse. Pope Clement V died a month later, on April 20th, 1314, and King Philip IV died on November 29th, 1314, after a hunting accident. The dissolution of the Knights Templar sent shockwaves across Europe, leaving a void that was never truly filled. Their legacy, however, far outlived their physical presence. The dramatic nature of their fall, the suddenness of their arrests, the brutal interrogations, and the fiery deaths of their leaders all contributed to the rapid growth of myths and legends around them. The secrecy that had always surrounded their rituals and financial dealings, once a source of their strength, now became fertile ground for wild speculation. Perhaps it was the image of the warrior monk, a paradox in itself, that captured the imagination. Or the idea of a secret society possessing hidden knowledge or treasures. Whatever the reason, the Templars quickly became figures of enduring fascination. Tales of their survival, of secret lineages continuing underground, of hidden hoards of gold, and even of their involvement in the construction of Rosslyn Chapel in Scotland, began to circulate and persist through the centuries. Some legends claimed that a remnant of the order fled to Scotland or Portugal, where they continued to operate in secret, perhaps even influencing the later development of Freemasonry. While Masonic rites do incorporate some Templar symbolism, direct historical lineage is largely dismissed by scholars. In Portugal, King Diniz, who had largely resisted Philip's pressures, re-established the order under a new name, the Order of Christ, effectively preserving much of their property and personnel. This new order would later play a significant role in the Age of Discovery, with figures like Henry the Navigator serving as its Grand Master. This transformation provided a tangible, if indirect, continuation of some Templar traditions and resources. The Templar story is a complex tapestry woven with threads of faith, power, wealth, and betrayal. They rose from humble beginnings to become one of the most powerful and influential organizations of the Middle Ages, guardians of pilgrims, innovators in finance, and formidable warriors. Their fall, orchestrated by a desperate king and a compromised pope, was a stark reminder of the fragility of even the most formidable institutions when confronted by ruthless political ambition. Even today, the Knights Templar continue to inspire books, films, and countless theories. Their enigmatic symbol, the red cross on a white background, remains instantly recognizable. The mystery surrounding their true beliefs, their immense wealth, and the precise circumstances of their demise continues to captivate. Were they truly heretics or innocent victims of a powerful monarch's greed? Historians generally lean towards the latter, viewing the accusations as politically motivated slanders rather than genuine theological deviations. The enduring appeal of the Templars lies not just in their historical impact, but in the lingering questions, the sense of a secret history just beyond reach, and the dramatic, almost cinematic arc of their rise and fall. Their legacy is not merely one of crusading zeal or financial prowess, but of a powerful, mysterious order that, even in its dissolution, cast a long and indelible shadow across the pages of history.